Hello and welcome to UFC Inside the Octagon. John Gooden, Dan Hardy with you as usual. So for the very first time, the Octagon heads to Western Australia for UFC 221. On today's show, we'll be taking a look at the main event for the interim middleweight title between the Soldier of God, Yoel Romero, and the former Strikeforce and UFC middleweight champion, Luke Rockhold.
Two of the very best in the 185-pound division.
Yoel Romero, Luke Rockhold for the UFC's interim middleweight championship.
Great stuff, Dan. This for the interim title. Of course, Robert Whittaker with an injury. He's out, but the Australian fans get to see these Goliaths of the middleweight divisions. So let's take a look. We know and have seen both Luke and Yoel a bunch of times. Hugely exciting fighters with credentials before they came to the UFC as well. But I think you'll agree, Dan, on this page are the most significant factors.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the age is interesting because Rockhold's the younger fighter by 7 years but has more experience. But then you have to also think that Yoel Romero spent a good portion of his adult career as an amateur wrestler at the Olympics. So a lot of his experience comes from a high-level competing background, but not necessarily mixed martial arts, whereas Luke obviously got rolling a bit earlier and has got more cage time, more octagon experience. As far as reach and height goes, we've talked about this before, they're relevant as long as the fight stays at range. You know, Luke Rockhold's the 3-inch height and the 4-inch reach advantage. If he can utilise that, that's excellent. Yeah. But as we know, Yoel Romero is going to try and close distance pretty quickly, and he is incredibly quick when he closes distance. So, yeah. OK, we have a second page as well to these, and this is interesting. Yeah. So you think Yoel Romero, explosive athlete, but actually he has an average fight length, twice the length of Luke Rockhold. Yeah, well, it's a bit of a myth around Romero because he is so fast and explosive. People assume that he gets the fights done pretty quickly. But in actuality, he doesn't. A lot of the time when he's catching these guys is because they've kind of been lulled into a false sense of security because he takes his time. He paces himself. Very comfortable, isn't he? Very comfortable. Very, very confident they can deal with whatever they throw at him. So it's almost like he takes a round or two just to kind of feel them out and almost discourage them with just shutting their game down without giving them a great deal back. Yeah. Rockhold, on the other hand, is very similar, but he tends to get the first round out the way, kind of gets a good read on his opponent, and then jumps on them in the second. Right. So I do expect Rockhold to be the one that starts to push the pace quicker, and I think with this being a 5-round fight, the sooner he starts making Romero work, the better for him. OK, right. Well, let's get into the analysis, shall we? And let's start with Luke Rockhold. Classic Rockhold, shall we say. We've covered him before. Yep. There are patterns to his game, but they're obviously very, very difficult to stop. Well, he's got two main weapons. The two main things that he uses that we see the majority of the time are his right hook and his left body kick. The right hook, interestingly, if you go back into his Strikeforce career, a lot of the time he starts in an orthodox position and then pivots back to a southpaw stance to use that as a counter. You can see it here, look. So you'll see he actually removes the lead leg, which creates a space for his opponents to move into, and then as they step into that space, there's a right hook counter waiting for them. And because obviously they feel like they're covering distance, they're more eager to cover that, and then they just get caught on the side and knocked. I mean, this was a perfect one against Paul Bradley, as you'll see here. So just the front foot of Rockhold here just sweeps back, and then he counters with the right hook. Now, obviously, in this fight, because he's fighting a southpaw, it's not going to work the same. But if he's in a southpaw stance and he's comfortable throwing the left hook in the same way, then he can pivot and counter with that. So there is an application for this, but he does need to be ambidextrous if he's going to use it. But there's definitely power in that right hook, and because of that power, he's gained a lot of confidence in that punch, and he uses it a lot. He uses it over and over again. It can be a little predictable. It has been in the past, but again, because he's fighting a southpaw, it does change a few things. Now, the body kick as well is something that he's used a lot. He's got a very, very powerful left kick, which he uses to set up the head kick, or obviously uses the head kick to set up the body kick like he did against Philippou. He's very good at identifying those targets, and because he's very fast with it and he's very good at placement, he's able to vary the targets so he can then start opening up vulnerabilities. Again, it changes when he's fighting a southpaw, but I'll cover that in a second. I think there is an alternative for it, but the weapon that he has with the left leg attacking the body is not going to be as useful in this fight. The body attacks absolutely will be useful because we saw Whittaker wear Yoel Romero down with them in their last fight, the teeps to the body. But like I said, because he can't use that kick to the body because he's working to the closed side, he's going to have to vary it up. Like a skip lead knee or something. Working the midsection is a good idea, but he just doesn't have the same opportunities to use those comfortable techniques that he has.
One thing I noted, he's right-handed.
Yeah.
And he fights out of a southpaw stance, which is why maybe the early footage was him coming out orthodox and they've adjusted his style.
Quite possibly, quite possibly. You know, a lot of fighters, they tend to find they can fight from both stances, but they have different tools and weapons for both.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine, Paul Daly, he's right-handed, but he stands... he's left-handed, but he stands orthodox as well. So his power hand is the front, and that's why he's landing left hook knockouts all the time. It's a slight adaptation in mixed martial arts, and I think we lean a lot more on the lead hand in mixed martial arts than they do in boxing. In boxing, obviously, you tend to use the jab to open up the right hand, and then the left hook's the counter. Whereas in mixed martial arts, as people are crashing forward, it's so easy to catch them with that counter lead hook. So if you are adept at having your lead hand forward, like Rockhold is, it is a good weapon to use.
OK, well, let's take a look at Yoel Romero then. A very strong reaction fighter.
Yeah, and an excellent striking defence as well. And this is partly down to the fact that he's got reactions like a cat. I mean, if his reactions have slowed down by age, we've not seen him. I mean, he must have been scary in his prime because his balance, his ability to read his opponent, his ability to ride and roll the fight, to not really be dominated in any way because he's so difficult to control. And then these opportunities that he has here to just take people's legs away from him draws on that really, really deep wrestling background. Again, his athleticism gets him out of a lot of trouble. So this is why in the first couple of rounds, he kind of can take his time a little bit. He allows people to kind of work out their game so he gets a good read, so he sees the tells, whether they're dropping their head for his wonderful flying knees or whether they're looking for a lazy shot like that. Now, I've spoken about this before. This is incredible because it's one of those situations that you don't really appreciate when you're watching the fight full speed. You watch this, Tim Kennedy shoots a takedown, Yoel Romero defends it, and they're back to standing. But if you watch this slowed down, like I always like to do, just watch the reaction from Yoel Romero. So right here, he rolls under the lead hand, and then he pivots his... So you see here, Tim Kennedy's stepping in with that lead leg. Yoel Romero doesn't even want his hip and leg to touch. So as Tim Kennedy's stepping forward, he pivots out. I mean, it's just incredible. It's like a game of Operation. You know, you just don't touch the sides. Don't touch me. He's so good at just kind of avoiding people by inches. He even did it in the Whittaker fight as well. Just slipping out the way of a left hook that could have probably knocked him out. But because he knows he's got these reactions, he can lean on them, he can rely on them. And then people start overextending, start leaving themselves vulnerable. And that's where his striking comes into play, because when you've got that kind of explosive power, it works both ways, both defensively and offensively. We've also talked about that pronounced step that we get on the back leg, where he loads that lead, that rear leg, so he can spring forward with a power shot like he does there. I mean, he's incredibly powerful. He covers distance so quickly, and really, I mean, he's kind of like the prototype athlete. You know, if you're building an athlete, he's got all the natural ingredients of what you want. Heavily muscled, lean, very, very fast. In mixed martial arts, there's a slight lean on endurance, which is where Rockhold comes in. But in those first few rounds, he is a terrifying force in the octagon. Not necessarily because he's a fast worker, he's a fast finisher, but because he has the potential, and that's what holds people back. So what we're going to see in this first round against Rockhold is Rockhold's going to be quite cautious filling him out, because you always know he's got that stick of dynamite that he can throw at your head. And when he's got that kind of power, like Chris Weidman found out here, you just can't count him out at any point in the fight. And his athletic ability allows him to get away with a lot. I mean, look at that, a flying knee straight into a big punch. He can do things that we can't even really comprehend as human beings. I don't think that's unfair to say. I would say the same thing about John Jones, you know what I mean? Those crazy athletes that we've got that are able to draw on these skills that allow them to kind of fill in the gaps where technique is missing is really where Yoel Romero is at with his striking. I mean, you don't teach somebody a flying knee and a spinning back fist on their first day in striking. No. But we very rarely see him use a jab because he doesn't really need it. You know what I mean? He can cover that distance. He doesn't need to set it up with a jab. He doesn't need to create a smoke screen to set up the next shot. He can time you, and he's fast enough and powerful enough to just do it straight out. One thing that I thought was fascinating was the conversation between Joe Rogan and John Danaher, where Danaher said it's not a 0 to 60 speed he has, it's his ability to change direction very, very quickly, probably faster than anyone else, pound for pound. Yeah, an amazing conversation, and John Danaher always makes me feel like a child when I'm listening to him when he talks about combat sports, because the depth that he thinks about things is really kind of what I'm trying to aim for. And with that talk about changing direction as opposed to speed, It's a fascinating point, and I think he's right. It is more applicable to mixed martial arts to be able to change your direction than 0 to 60 in a straight line. The likeness that I would use is Demetrius Johnson against John Dodson. My argument is that John Dodson, probably over 100 metres, is a faster athlete.
Right.
He can create more speed and more power in a linear fashion, whereas Demetrius Johnson's excellent at changing his angles, switching back and forth.
Yeah.
You know, guys like Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw, again, they lean on that reverse and change of direction, which we see in the lighter weight classes a lot more. But when you apply that at middleweight,
scary.
He really stands out.
Yeah. We spoke about patterns with Rockhold, and there's a pattern that you highlighted before when we looked at Yoel Romero.
Yeah.
And it's something that there's a difference here because we're southpaw to southpaw. So I'll let you explain.
OK. Well, when we first discussed this, it's a bit of a tell. And it's every time somebody attacks the inside lead leg, we see him use this sweep. You see the head come forward, the lead hand comes down. It's a bad habit. The reason for it is, in my opinion, is because he's a wrestler. Because if you throw something at him, his instinct is to grab a hold of it. Now, this changes, obviously. In the Whittaker fight, he was feinting, he was flinching because the teep to the body was affecting him. But in Rockhold's last fight, he started switching back to orthodox, which we haven't seen since the Strikeforce days, and starts working that low chop calf kick, which is really kind of taking over mixed martial arts at the moment.
Yeah, it's all the rage.
It is all the rage, yeah, because it's so effective. I mean, a couple of shots on that lead leg early on, and it really deadens that muscle and it affects all of your movement. Now, you can see the effect that it's having on David Branch there. Branch is not having the reaction that Romero does where he tries to sweep it. But so if you stand southpaw for me for a second.
Have I got to try and look like Romero?
Please do if you can. So if we're standing both in southpaw positions, usually I'm an orthodox fighter and I'm thrown to the inside leg, which means Romero's sweeping to the outside. Now, you've got to think, if they're both southpaw in this equation, as he's throwing that kick to the outside leg, you've got to think Romero's going to be reaching to scoop on the inside. Okay. So that leaves him vulnerable for two things. One, because his head's exposed, and two, because he leans himself forward.
Yeah.
So there's a shin to the face coming there. And we've seen Rockhold very, very conscious of programming people, setting people up. The Bisping fight was a good example because he kept hammering that body kick in. He kept wearing him down, kept getting Michael Bisping to take the bait. Even though Bisping knows he's got a good head kick, when you start thundering those body kicks in, you start getting that reaction. Now, it's not going to work against the southpaw because that's the closed side, but he can certainly work that outside low kick. If he starts chopping at that lead leg, he gets the reaction from Yoel Romero. That's the target he's looking for. And that, ultimately, is really what Rockhold needs to be looking for on the feet, is programming him and setting him up because he has those natural instincts to reach for things, and he can capitalise on that. OK,
another massive part of the fight is when we get outside of striking. We've taken a look at that. On face value, you've got to say, or one might say, Romero wrestling, Rockhold submissions. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that I think there are certain strengths to Rockhold's game. I think he's very good in the clinch up against the fence. You would imagine a lot of the work that he does with Cormier and Velasquez over the years, as well as all of Khabib's mates that are at AKA. He's always smashed up against the fence because he's the tall, rangy striker in the gym. So these guys are going to try and smother him. So he's actually got very good at this body lock position. And one thing that he's able to do with this, he's able to seamlessly transition to the positions that he wants, where he can start getting the mount, taking the back, etc., etc. Yoel Romero's got an excellent body lock. Goes with his athletic ability. Once he's clamped on, it's very difficult to shake him. And Robert Whittaker did a good job of stuffing those takedowns in the first round. One thing that did occur to me, though, and this is early in the first round, is once he's gone through all of this effort to try and get the fight to the floor, he fails, he backs up against the fence, so he's still in control, he's still got the body lock, but he holds Whittaker there for 20 seconds or so because he's trying to get his breath back. So my argument is that if they lock up in the clinch, the more Rockhold can turn it into an endurance battle, the better for him in the long run. With Romero, when it comes to his takedowns, it's all about that explosive power. It's all about not waiting in the clinch, driving through your opponent, getting them on the floor and then controlling them. If you do end up in the clinch, work fast. You know, chain things together, foot sweeps, or those kind of things, because the more he spends in the clinch working with Rockhold, the more he's going to tire out, and that's where Rockhold's scrambles and submissions come into play. Look, let's just go back to this. It's his understanding of how to manoeuvre around a human being, as well as how to manoeuvre a human being in itself, and understanding how to take the bases away, how to remove things, how to lift weight off a leg before he knee taps. it's such a high level that a lot of people in these situations need a few seconds to think about that. They need to consider what the next chain move is, but he doesn't because it's so instinctual to him. Now look at this. He's in on a single leg with Whittaker here. He's starting to circle him over towards his hip, which obviously would normally sit somebody on their hip, but Whittaker's got good balance. So he's able to work for an underhook here. Watch this. So Whittaker's working for an underhook here because if he can get that, he can force this leg down to the floor and now he's got some purchase. Now he can drive back into him. Romero obviously knows this. So, where's my circle? So, the left hand of Romero is going to drop straight down to the knee here. And as you can see, because he's already driving forward, there's no weight on this.
The timing of this is absolutely amazing.
It's amazing. That foot's not in contact with the floor. There's an inch or two gap underneath that, so there's no weight on that leg. So as he does drive through, he lowers his left leg and he just taps the knee. It's just so effortless. But obviously then when they land, they take all of his body weight on top of them because, like Cormier, being an Olympic wrestler, not only do you know how to take people down, but you know how to land on them to keep them down. Right. The one that always comes to mind is Cormier against Gustafsson. Throws him up in the air, spins him around 360 and then lands with all of his weight on him. Romero's excellent at that, and you can see how heavily muscled he is. If he gets in that top position, he can unleash a barrage of elbows or strikes, which will pretty much get anybody out of there with the power that he has. So what's interesting in these situations here is when they do come into contact, can Romero blast through Rockhold, or is Rockhold able to hold him off long enough to keep him on the feet and wear him out, or set something up?
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? That fence work versus the open space. Yeah. Who's gonna win that? One thing I love about Rockhold, though, we talk about that open space, his ability to ride the momentum of the takedown. Yeah. And then in the scramble, he finds brilliant opportunities to just take control of the fight. Yeah,
and same again, because, you know, you've got to think of the guys that have been around him at AKA for a number of years. They're all trying to take him down. They're all wrestlers. Yeah. So he's a part of him is accepting the fact that they're going to try and take him down, and he's got to capitalise on it. So here against Weidman, he wraps the neck, he rolls him over with a beautiful butterfly hook and then keeps a hold of the guillotine. Now, even if he's not successful with this, and Yoel Romero's hardly got a neck, so attacking his neck can be incredibly difficult. But if he can wear him out, if he can force him to work, you know, eventually a vulnerability will open up. And this was, obviously, we've covered this before, beautiful work. Rolling through with Bosch and then setting up the inverted triangle. It shows a variation in his game, a variety in his game, that he doesn't necessarily have to take the back. He doesn't necessarily have to get a guillotine. He can get an inverted triangle and then finish with a kimura. So there are lots of different options for him, and the more fatigued Romero gets, the more options open up to him. And as we know with Romero, because he's so explosive, because he's so difficult to hold down, the gaps in his game that I would have to take care of, I'd have to make sure I'm not giving underhooks, I'm not giving position as I'm standing up. He just blasts up to his feet because he can get away with it. But if he starts to get more tired and he starts to leave those gaps, that's when Rockhold can start clamping onto him.
And when he does, he has the submission threat. If we cast our minds back to the stats page, Romero doesn't go for submissions.
No, zero.
Rockhold does. He's like a world-class grappler.
Absolutely. Almost 2 a minute is almost 2 a round is what he's going for. And there's a sequence that he likes. He likes to take people's back. It makes them vulnerable to a lot of different submissions, and it can also force them to carry his weight. Something that he started doing early days in Strikeforce is as he circles to the back, he goes for this position here, which I find quite interesting because I don't see many people using this. So it's almost like a tie clinch, almost like a plum clinch, but his hands are over the top of each other, clamped onto their shoulder. Now, you've got to think of the structure of Yoel Romero. I mean, he's heavily muscled. He's like a beginner's climbing wall. I mean, he's got loads of handles, loads of grips.
I love that. Yeah.
Right. So if he reaches up and clamps onto that trapezius muscle, if he can control that and slowly climb his way to the back, Romero is going to be scrambling back to his feet as he's giving his back to Rockhold. And it's beautiful work how he just drops that hook in. He's got excellent flexibility in his hips, which allow him to pick his hook right up and drop it in and take control immediately. And then in the scramble as well, he's good at leaving his hooks in the right position so his opponents roll them into the back control. And when he gets the back, I mean, we've seen him finish several times with rear naked choke, but if we watch his last fight against David Branch, this really is the statement that I think he's going to try and make against Romero. He's not going to keep chasing that rear naked choke early. He's going to wear him down first. And this is echoes of DC against Rumble Johnson both times around, you know. Wear them out, take their back, choke them out. It's a perfect game plan for Yoel Romero. Obviously, there are so many dangers that Yoel Romero presents, but the weaknesses in his game would lead Rockhold into this game plan. So the game plan that he's always had since the beginning of Strikeforce will pay dividends here as long as he can keep away from the danger areas of Romero.
Another thing that you pointed out as well was the physical structure of Romero and how that might benefit Rockhold's game as well.
Absolutely, because he likes that body triangle. So you've got to think that Romero's heavily muscled upper body, heavily muscled lower body, but he's got a very narrow waist.
Yeah.
So if Rockhold can get to the back, he controls him with hooks, he climbs up him, he gets locked on, chest to back, then he gets that body triangle on. It's going to be so difficult for Romero to shake him off.
It's like a big wedge.
Exactly
it's
that.
It's going to be a perfect placement for that.
He's shaped like an old school egg timer. Do you know what I mean? You know what I mean? There's the narrow part of his body is right in the middle, which is easy for Rockhold to get that body triangle around and clamp onto him. And then wherever Romero goes, he just rolls and rolls with him. He stays on his back, keeps ground and pounding him, and Romero's constantly looking to defend somebody who's behind him who can't see.
I'm obviously too young to understand the old school egg timer. I think I saw it in a museum one time. A little storyline to this one, and there aren't really that many. Rockhold's not a kind of guy that really goes out there after it. Yeah. And Romero is someone who I think a lot of people would prefer not to face. But Rockhold is with a new team. He has said to the media that he likes to take himself out of his comfort zone, and that has led him to the wing of Henry Hooft.
Yeah.
But you don't actually necessarily agree with taking yourself out of the comfort zone.
Well,
or his version of that.
Yeah, I have two opinions of it, because your comfort zone can mean very different things. For me, I realised towards the end of my career that the Octagon was my comfort zone. Right. Because the idea of stepping out of that and going into any other industry was quite intimidating. Now, Rockhold, if he considers AKA's comfort zone, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that means he can try things and test things against guys that he's worked with over a number of years, that he trusts.
So the ego isn't there?
The ego's not there. You can test things, you can try things, you can leave yourself vulnerable and know you're not going to be punished. Whereas you step onto a Shark Tank mat like down at Henry Hooft's place, or Extreme Couture was my experience, or American Top Team, you walk onto those mats and you are fighting every day.
Yeah.
So you are out of your comfort zone because the pressure's on you. But what it can also do is it can actually force you further into your comfort zone when it comes to technique. We know he loves the right hook, the body kick.
Yeah.
If you watch all of his sparring at the gym, they're exactly what he's using. Because he's not going to try anything new, because everybody on the mat's going to try and knock him out.
Yeah.
So there are different... I mean, there's a benefit to that, of course. You need to put yourself within the fire sometimes and test your mettle. But at the same time, you also need to be in a place where you can try things and learn and grow your game. And, he's a young man. There's still plenty of time for him to develop. And if we still see the same things over and over again, he'll get predictable as well. And that's a danger.
My only counter to that is that he's also been down to Mayweather's gym, boxing some of the pros. And I've seen him with the Mendez brothers, for you jiu-jitsu heads out there, and he's put the gi on and he's been trying to work that guard with those guys. So, but I absolutely see what you're saying. Yeah, when the ego is present, then it sort of masks the learning ability.
Yeah. But there's just two sides to it. I mean, when I went to Extreme Couture, I was on the mat with 20 of the best fighters in the world for 6 weeks. I got better at the things that I could already do when I got there, and didn't learn anything new.
Which isn't the worst thing.
Not necessarily, no, because you refine those techniques. Yeah. But if you're looking to step outside of that and add something new to your game, the idea of travelling to different gyms is usually what people do that for. Going to the Mendez brothers, going to the Mayweather gym to work with different people is to try and, pad out your game, add more things to it. At the same time, though, if you feel like you're fighting every day, you don't take risks, and that's the flip side to the coin. There are two arguments to it, and I think there's a benefit to both, but there's also a drawback to both. OK, and Romero, maybe one of his last chances at getting to the gold. I mean, he's 40, he doesn't move like it, he doesn't look like it, but facts are facts. He's an ageing mixed martial artist, and it's the middleweight division as well, not like a heavyweight division. Yeah, absolutely. You do rely on a lot more athletic ability when it comes to the lighter weight classes. I mean, heavyweight wisdom comes into play. As soon as you start going down the weight classes, you need to rely on your speed and your power and your reaction times. Now, as we've seen, his don't seem to have slowed down, and if they have, he must have been absolutely terrifying on the wrestling mat. Well, he was. I mean, you can watch the YouTube videos. 1999 world champion. That's incredible. How long he's been at the top level. So, and he's been through all these training camps. He knows how to prepare himself for these high-level competitions. What's interesting about the situation he's in now, though, is he's coming off a 5-round loss to the man that's now the champion. So he can go back to the drawing board. He sits down with his coaches and he goes through all of the reasons why he lost that fight. And it was a razor-thin fight. I mean, for me, he won the first 2 rounds, and Whittaker was obviously injured with the knee as well. So he must have felt stepping out of the octagon that he could have won that fight. He could have taken it away. And that may give him a new level of motivation stepping into this one because, as you said, it's probably the last chance he's going to get on, getting his hands on UFC gold.
Yeah, and a great fight as well. Romero, Rockhold, I think the UFC have tried to make this in the past. It finally goes down in Western Australia as well, which is another bonus. That wraps us for this episode of Inside the Octagon. Keep the conversation going using the hashtag Inside the Octagon and the handle @UFC Europe. Thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the fights, and we'll see you next time.
For the UFC interim middleweight title, one of the best athletes to ever cross into this UFC octagon, Yoel Romero. The former UFC middleweight champion Luke Rockhold coming out to prove that he is still the best.
Oh, he's out! One of the greatest strikers in the history of the heavyweight division, Mark Hunt. This kid is a phenomenal talent and just a stud of an athlete.